Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. Lately I have been contemplating the idea of writing a book on the subject of leadership. In a previous job, I read or was exposed to a lot of books that at least touched on this subject, and it seems like there's a lot of leadership books out there that sort of contain one good idea that could be summarized in a couple of paragraphs, embedded in like 200 pages of filler. And then I've also seen or heard about a lot of leaders taking even these good ideas and misapplying them in really catastrophic ways. So if I did write a book, it would be probably sort of a study of the failure modes of leadership. Now, is that really worth writing? I don't know. I've got other books that I definitely want to write first. But as I've been thinking about this topic, it occurred to me that there is a fundamental error in the all too common advice that if you need to correct someone's behavior, you should criticize the behavior and not the person. And I realized that at face value, that sounds like good advice. It sounds like common sense, because, if you have to criticize someone's behavior, obviously you want them to change their behavior. You don't want them to take your criticism too personally, because if they interpret it as an attack on their person, then they're more likely to be resistant to it. So I understand where this came from, but the problem is that behavior is fundamentally linked to identity. I mean, philosophers have been arguing for thousands of years whether your behavior dictates your identity, you are the sum of what you've done, or whether your identity is what dictates your behavior. You do what you do because of who you are. Or is it some combination of the two, where your identity dictates how you behave, but then what you do reinforces that identity in kind of a feedback loop. So I don't know that debate has really ever been resolved, but there is unquestionably an inseparable, intimate connection between identity and behavior. So it's fundamentally impossible to critique someone's behavior without critiquing the person and their identity. At least that was my initial revelation on the subject. Now, as I thought about it more, I realized, behavior is also influenced by circumstances. I mean, if your identity dictates how you respond to a given situation, you'll still react differently to a different situation. So maybe you could come close to criticizing the behavior without criticizing the person if you instead criticize the circumstances that elicited the behavior. But that doesn't really revalidate the advice to criticize the behavior rather than the person for three reasons. First of all, if it really is circumstances that are eliciting the behavior that you want to change, then there's no point criticizing the behavior. Instead, what you need to do is change the circumstances to elicit the behavior that you want. So the advice kind of becomes moot. Second, in a lot of situations where you might want to change someone's behavior, it's not the circumstances that are the problem. It's how the person is responding to those circumstances. And so at that point, you have to change the person to change the behavior. And third, even if circumstances are a significant factor, in many cases the circumstances may be beyond your control, and so you're right back to trying to convince the person to change in order to respond more appropriately to non-ideal circumstances. So it seems to me that anytime you want to have a conversation with someone about changing their behavior, you really need to approach it with a realization that you are asking them to change their identity. And some identity changes are more significant and more palatable than others. They can range anywhere from fairly easy to almost impossible. I mean, if the behavior that you want to change is maybe an employee that's making some technical errors in their work because they're not very knowledgeable in a certain subject, then you can approach it from, hey, you're already in this role, you can be more successful in this role if you become more knowledgeable in this area, and here's some training materials to make you more knowledgeable in this area. That kind of personal growth, of expanding your knowledge in ways that will make you more successful, is an identity change that most people would be very receptive to. On the other hand, if it's a change that boils down to, I need you to quit being so selfish so that I can make more money off of you, then that's going to be a very difficult change to sell. But regardless, if you're going to criticize someone's behavior, you need to realize that you are criticizing their fundamental identity, and you should understand what part of their identity you're asking them to change and contemplate whether that is reasonable or even feasible. So at this point, I think I've made my point, and I think I've rambled long enough, so until next time, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.